I used to stand in the hallway while my father made plans for a future I was never part of. He spoke about legacy, inheritance, and family honor, but never once said my name. I was the daughter who was supposed to marry well and stay quiet. But I didn't. And what happened next changed everything. Let me tell you how it all began. My name is Caroline Turner, and I was born into a family where legacy wasn't just a word. It was a bloodline reserved for men. My father, Martin Turner, was a proud man. A self-made man, he'd often remind us. He built his reputation from the ground up in our small town of Willow Creek, bought land, opened hardware stores, and eventually became the kind of man who wore a suit just to walk across his own backyard. But no matter how much he built, one thing never changed. In his eyes, daughters didn't inherit. Sons did. I was the middle child, sandwiched between two brothers, Elliot, the eldest, and Mark, the youngest. My mother, bless her heart, tried to make it feel like we were equals, but even she knew the unspoken rule in our home. When Elliot was 10, Dad took him to walk the property lines of the family estate, a stretch of 5 acres wrapped around the colonial-style home my grandfather built. When I turned 10, I got a porcelain doll and a reminder to help your mother more. It wasn't just the inheritance. It was the way I was spoken to, gently, almost dismissively, like I was a guest in the family rather than a part of its foundation. Dad would hold family meetings at the dinner table, discussing plans for the business, the estate, future expansions. I was expected to clear the plates afterward. Elliot always played the part of the heir. Confident, loud, sometimes arrogant, but Dad saw that as strength. I was quieter, more observant. I studied hard, kept to myself, and dreamed bigger than the town limits would ever allow. But those dreams didn't fit the Turner mold. You're too ambitious for your own good, Dad would say, not as a compliment but as a warning. It all came to a head when I was 19. I'd just come back from college for the summer. My first year studying business and real estate development. I was bubbling with ideas, proud of what I'd learned. One evening after dinner, I tried to share a proposal I'd drafted for turning one of Dad's underperforming properties into a profitable rental. He barely looked at it. Just set it on the table like it was a menu he didn't feel like reading. "That's not your concern, Caroline," he said. "Leave the business stuff to Elliot. Why don't you help your mother with the dishes?" I felt heat rise to my cheeks. That moment, dismissed not for my lack of ideas, but for my lack of being male, lodged itself deep in my bones. I said nothing, just nodded and helped Mom with the sink full of plates while Elliot laughed at something on his phone. The house itself was something else entirely. Our family home wasn't just a building. It was a symbol. White columns, red brick, 2 oak trees out front that had seen generations of Turners play beneath their branches. My mother used to call it the heart of the family. To me, it always felt like a heart I was never allowed to touch. And yet, I loved that house. I knew every creaky board on the back porch, every groove in the kitchen table where I did my homework, every quiet corner I'd escape to when the boys were roughhousing or Dad was in one of his silent moods. It was mine in memory but never in name. When I turned 23, just months after finishing college and getting a job offer in the city, I overheard a conversation between Dad and Elliot that changed everything. They were on the back porch. I had come to visit, and they didn't know I was nearby. Elliot asked casually, "So what's the plan with the house when you're older?" Dad didn't hesitate. "You'll take it, of course. You're the firstborn. It's your responsibility to keep the family legacy alive. And Caroline? She'll understand. It's not her place. It's not her place." That sentence landed harder than any slap could. I stood there, hidden by the kitchen wall, heart thudding so loud I feared they might hear it. In that moment, everything crystallized. No matter how hard I worked, no matter what I built, my father would never see me as someone worthy of carrying the family name. Not in property, not in business, not even in legacy. The next morning I packed up early. I didn't wait for breakfast, didn't say much to anyone. Just gave Mom a soft hug, nodded to Elliot, and said goodbye to Dad with a tight smile and a forced, "Thanks for everything." I never lived under that roof again. I moved to the city, took the job, and started building a life. But in the back of my mind, through every late night at the office, every challenge I overcame, every little win, I held on to the memory of that sentence. It's not her place. Not her place. I would make one. Not by begging, not by proving anything to a man who'd already made up his mind, but by creating something on my own terms, something so undeniable that even he would have no choice but to see it. That house may not have been mine by birthright, but one day I would make it mine by choice. It had been 5 years since I left Willow Creek. I returned only twice a year, Thanksgiving and Mother's Day. Not for my father, but for my mother, whose hugs still lingered with the scent of lavender, and who never stopped calling me her brightest light. I had built a steady life in the city, managing mid-tier residential properties at first, then branching out into small-scale flips. I reinvested every penny I could. No vacations, no designer clothes, just grit, spreadsheets, and a growing portfolio. At 28, I bought my first duplex. At 29, I signed my first commercial development contract. I still wasn't making headlines, but I was making moves. And yet, despite the life I was building, every trip home reminded me of what I didn't have, and how intentional that exclusion had been. It was during one of those trips, a Sunday morning after church, that the final crack in our family facade came. Dad, Elliot, and I were standing in the driveway. The house loomed behind us, pristine, proud, and still out of reach. My mother was inside making coffee. Mark, my younger brother, was tossing a football to one of his nephews near the oak trees. Dad turned to Elliot and said, without even lowering his voice, "Once the paperwork's finalized, you'll be on the deed." I froze. Elliot just nodded, grinning. "About time. We've been talking about this since high school." I tried to keep my tone even. "Finalized? What paperwork?" They both looked at me, startled, like they'd forgotten I was standing there. Dad cleared his throat. "I'm transferring the title of the house to Elliot. It's only right. He's the firstborn." "Only right," I echoed. He shifted, suddenly irritated. "Don't start, Caroline. You know how this works. Legacy, responsibility. He's the one staying in town, helping with the family business. You made your choice when you left." I looked from one man to the other. Elliot avoided eye contact, suddenly busy brushing something off his sleeve. I felt my stomach twist. "You didn't even tell me." "There was nothing to tell," Dad snapped. "It's not your concern. Not your concern." There it was again. That phrase that haunted me like a splinter I couldn't dig out. I clenched my jaw and nodded slowly, every muscle in my face tight with the effort of holding in what I really wanted to say. "You're right," I said quietly. "It's not my concern." Then I turned and walked back toward my car. Inside, my mother must have seen something in my eyes because she followed me out before I could start the engine. "Care," she said softly, using the old nickname only she still did. "Don't let him get to you. You know how your father is." "I do," I said, barely keeping my voice steady. "That's the problem." She laid a hand on my arm. "You've made a beautiful life for yourself. You don't need this house to prove anything." But it wasn't about the house, not really. It was about everything it represented. The way my father had deliberately written me out of a legacy, not because I was incapable, but because I was inconvenient. I didn't stay in town. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't play the quiet daughter who waits to be invited in. And for that I had been excluded again. My mother squeezed my hand. "You've always been the strong one." I drove away that afternoon without saying another word to my father. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, in my apartment, I pulled out an old manila folder I kept tucked in the back of my closet. Inside were copies of zoning maps, property tax records, and aerial surveys of my father's land. I'd started collecting them years ago, not out of spite, but out of curiosity. Out of a quiet, persistent hope that maybe one day, I'd find a way back to the table. Now that hope had turned to something else entirely. Not bitterness. Not revenge. Resolve. I spent the next 3 weeks diving deep. I called contacts in Willow Creek's municipal offices. I reviewed the public title history of the estate. My father had refinanced the house twice in the last 5 years, once to cover Elliot's failed cafe venture, and once again to buy out a silent partner in his hardware chain. The property wasn't free and clear anymore. He was stretched thinner than he let on. That was when I saw it, an official pre-foreclosure notice, filed quietly and publicly, hiding in plain sight. The house was in trouble. I sat back in my office chair and exhaled slowly. They didn't know it yet. But their belief that I had no place in the family legacy had just become the very door I would walk through. I wasn't going to confront my father. Not yet. That wasn't my style. I would do what I'd always done, quietly, strategically, and on my own terms. I began setting things in motion. I formed a shell company. I reached out to a broker who handled distressed property acquisitions. I watched, waited, and prepared. Not for revenge but for reclamation. They said it wasn't my concern. But it would be. Soon. When I was 16, my father told me success only mattered if other people saw it. If no one knows your name, what's the point? He'd said one night, sipping bourbon by the fireplace, Elliot nodding beside him like a shadow. At the time I believed him. But now, years later, I understood something deeper. Real power doesn't need to shout. It moves in silence, and when it arrives, it doesn't knock. It owns the door. After discovering the pre-foreclosure notice, I didn't rush. That would have been emotional. An emotion never built anything lasting. Instead, I started preparing. I had already built a modest but growing real estate business, Turner Property Group, named not for family pride, but because I knew one day the name would mean something on my terms. My company specialized in identifying undervalued properties, revitalizing them, and either reselling or leasing them to long-term tenants. I'd made it a point to study not just the market, but the behaviors of people who thought they were invincible. People like my father. He had always believed owning land was power, but he treated that land like a trophy, not a responsibility. He over-leveraged, refused to downsize, and poured money into Elliot's business ventures out of pride, never strategy. I, on the other hand, had built lean. By 31, I owned 12 properties outright, 6 residential, 4 commercial, and 2 mixed use. I lived modestly. I reinvested profits. And I had good relationships with banks because I didn't treat debt like a game. So when I decided to buy back the family home, I didn't just want it. I could afford it. I called Angela Bell, a property attorney I trusted with my most sensitive deals. She helped me set up a holding company, Willow Core Investments, with no link to my name. If anyone looked it up, it would look like just another quiet LLC buying distressed properties in rural markets. Next, I worked with James, my acquisitions agent, to monitor every movement on the estate's title. By now, the bank was close to initiating foreclosure proceedings. They were still trying to avoid public embarrassment, giving my father chances to refinance again, but the math wasn't in his favor. His credit lines were drying up. Elliot's second coffee shop had failed. And Mark had taken out a student loan in Dad's name that no one was talking about, but the banks knew. One night, sitting at my kitchen table, I stared at the final summary. Turner Family Home. Estimated buyout value. $612,000. It was a steep price, but I had it. No loans. No conditions. I wired the funds to my lawyer and signed the intent to purchase agreement in early spring, just 2 days before the property was set to go to public auction. No one in my family had a clue. And still, I didn't tell anyone. Not even my mother. Instead, I went back to work like nothing had happened. But something had. Every day after that, I carried myself differently. At meetings, I felt more grounded. In negotiations, I spoke with more certainty. I wasn't just closing deals, I was taking back what was mine. And not just a house, but a narrative I had been written out of my entire life. It's strange really how life can twist a wound into a weapon. While I waited for the legal formalities to finalize, I started revisiting old journals. Notes I had written at 16, 18, 21, moments when I dreamed of being someone else. I read entries where I cried over being excluded, where I ached to be seen. And now I realized something profound. I no longer needed to be seen by the people who refused to look. I saw myself. I respected who I had become. In late April, the deal closed. I became the legal owner of the Turner estate. A 2-story colonial with 5 acres, a wraparound porch, and a deed that now bore my company's name. The name of a woman who had once been told it wasn't her concern. The same afternoon, I drafted a formal invitation. Not a phone call, not a casual text. An invitation. It was addressed to Martin Turner. You are formally invited to the signing ceremony and transfer of ownership of 184, Glenwood Road, Willow Creek. Date, May 9, 4 p.m. Location, Turner Estate Dining Room. Buyer and new owner, Willow Core Investments. I didn't sign it. I let the mystery speak for itself. The envelope was hand-delivered to my father's mailbox by courier. I received no call, no email. But I knew he'd come. And he did. But I'll save that moment for later. In the meantime, I returned to the house on a quiet morning, 1 week before the signing. It had been 10 years since I stood alone inside that place. The scent of old wood and faint lemon polish still lingered. Dust covered most of the surfaces, and the kitchen tile was cracked. But the bones were still good. It was still the house I had traced with my fingers brick by brick in childhood. The house I wasn't allowed to want. I walked through every room slowly: hallway, study, den, master bedroom, touching walls like someone greeting an old friend. In the upstairs bedroom, I found my name still faintly scratched into the underside of a drawer. Page 13. I ran my fingers over it and smiled. This wasn't about pride. This wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. Taking back not just walls and wood but voice and memory. Reclaiming the dignity of the girl who had been told her place was outside the legacy. I stood on the back porch as the wind passed through the oak trees, whispering like ghosts of the past. And I thought, he thought I'd forgotten this place. He thought I'd disappear. But I didn't. I simply learned how to return with power. If this story is resonating with you so far, take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. There's so much more to come. And trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. Now let's get back to the story. On the afternoon of May 9th, the sun hung low over Willow Creek, casting long shadows across the porch of the house that once belonged to my father. The air was heavy, almost ceremonial, like it knew something was about to change. I had arrived an hour early. The dining room had been cleaned just enough. The table, once home to so many family dinners where my voice was background noise, now held a thick folder of closing documents, a notary's briefcase, and 2 pens, neither gold, neither symbolic. Just functional. Just business. At 4:07 p.m., I heard his car pull up. He was late, of course. Martin Turner didn't arrive on anyone else's schedule but his own. Even when his world was unraveling, he held fast to the illusion of control. I watched through the window as he stepped out of the car, gray suit, no tie, stiff posture. He looked thinner than I remembered, older too. His pride had aged faster than his body. I met him at the door. He didn't recognize me at first. I wore a navy blazer and slacks, hair tied back, clipboard in hand like any project manager overseeing a property transfer. His eyes flicked past me, scanning for someone else. A man probably. The real buyer. Then his gaze settled on mine. And the mask slipped. "Caroline?" he asked, voice low and uncertain. I didn't answer. I stepped aside and gestured toward the dining room. They're waiting. Inside, Angela sat ready with the paperwork. James, my acquisitions agent, stood to the side, neutral but observant. Dad entered slowly, his footsteps hesitant. He didn't sit. He looked around the room as if expecting someone to appear and explain the joke. Finally, he turned to me. "What is this?" I pulled out the chair at the head of the table, the one he always sat in growing up, and took my seat. Calm. Focused. "This," I said, "is the official transfer of ownership for 184 Glenwood Road." He stared at me, blinking. "You bought the house?" I nodded. "Through Willow Core Investments." "Yes." He looked to Angela, then to James. No one spoke. "You can't be serious," he muttered. Why would you even want it? After everything." I folded my hands neatly. "Because it belongs to me now. And I was willing to pay the price to make it official." "You think this is some kind of punishment?" "No," I said simply. "It's a resolution." He took a step back as if the air had shifted around him. For a moment I saw something flicker across his face. Not anger, not even shame. Just disbelief. Like he had misread the ending to a story he thought he wrote. "You always had a chip on your shoulder," he said quietly. "Even as a kid." "No," I replied. "I had a voice you didn't want to hear." He sat down slowly, not because he chose to, but because there was nowhere else to go. Angela began the formal review. The documents were read aloud, point by point. Property description. Final sale amount. Ownership reassignment. All above board. All irreversible. At one point my father interrupted. "You really paid that much?" "Yes," I said. "In full. No loans." The room went silent. I watched him wrestle with what that meant. The calculations running behind his eyes. The knowledge that I hadn't just bought the house. I'd done it without needing help. Without needing him. By the time he signed the final page, his hands were trembling. When it was done, Angela collected the paperwork and left the room. James followed. My father and I sat alone for the first time in years. He looked around the house, his house now mine. The silence stretched between us. I built this place, he said finally. I know, I answered. And I rebuilt myself. He turned to me. You really hated me that much? I shook my head. I didn't hate you. I just stopped needing your approval. He looked down at his hands. All I ever wanted was for the right person to carry it forward, he mumbled. I looked him straight in the eye. Then maybe you should have looked closer. We didn't cry. There were no hugs. No dramatic apologies. Just the heavy truth sitting between us like one last unspoken rule finally broken. I stood up, pushing my chair back with quiet certainty. You can stay for a few more minutes if you want. But after today, I need the keys returned by Friday. He nodded slowly. For once he didn't argue. As I walked him to the door, he paused just before stepping out. You've changed, he said. I met his gaze evenly. No. I just stopped shrinking. He opened his mouth as if to speak again, but didn't. Then he left. And just like that, the house was mine. Legally. Personally. Symbolically. I stood on the porch alone as the sun dipped lower, the shadows longer than before. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean. No parade. No press release. No Instagram post. Just peace. I had come full circle, not with vengeance but with resolve. The girl who was told she had no place had returned, and she brought a pen. 3 days after the signing, the final legal confirmations were processed, and the deed was officially transferred. The Turner family estate, 5 acres for bedrooms and decades of history, was now under my control. There was no applause. No announcement. Just a quiet email with a PDF and a note from Angela. All recorded. Congratulations, Caroline. I stared at that email for a long moment. Not because I doubted what had happened, but because for the first time the weight of it fully settled in. After all these years of being told what I wasn't, I now held in black and white undeniable proof of what I had become. I didn't need anyone's permission anymore. Later that week, word spread in town. Not publicly, just whispers through the community. The Turner house had been sold. Some said a developer bought it. Others speculated a hedge fund was collecting rural properties. No one guessed the truth. My favorite moment came from a phone call I wasn't supposed to receive. Mrs. Danvers, a sweet woman who used to bring us pies during the holidays when I was a girl, called my mother in confusion. I thought Elliot was getting the house. That's what everyone said. To which my mother, calm and composed, replied, well, it looks like Caroline had other plans. That was the day Elliot showed up at my office. Unannounced. He looked uncomfortable in a suit that didn't quite fit right. Probably the one Dad had bought him years ago. He stood in the lobby, glancing around nervously, until my assistant let him in. Caroline, he said, forcing a casual tone. Mind if I come in? I leaned back in my chair. You're already here. He didn't sit. Just hovered near the doorway like a guest who wasn't sure he belonged. So is it true? Is what true? That you bought the house? I met his gaze without blinking. Yes. He rubbed the back of his neck. I just don't understand. You never even wanted it. You left. I kept my voice even. I didn't leave because I didn't care. I left because I wasn't allowed to care. He flinched slightly like the truth had caught him off guard. Dad's struggling, he said after a moment. The business, the debt, the town, it's all falling apart. I know, I replied. That's why I bought the house. He finally sat down, but not comfortably. So what happens now? You gonna flip it? Bulldoze it? Build condos? I smiled faintly. No. I'm keeping it. I've already made arrangements to restore the original structure. It'll serve as the headquarters for a women's real estate mentorship program I'm launching next year. Elliot blinked. You're turning the Turner estate into some kind of training center? I nodded. That's right. For women like me. Women who were told they didn't belong in the room. He shook his head slowly. Dad's going to lose it. He already did, I said gently. But this time he lost it to someone who knows how to take care of it. He stood, no longer able to sit still. You really had this planned all along, didn't you? I paused. No, I said honestly. I just never forgot how it felt to be excluded. And when the opportunity came, I was ready. He left without saying goodbye. That weekend, I visited the house again, my house. The renovation team had started light demo work. Old carpet pulled back. Kitchen cabinets removed. Decades of dust swept away like the last remnants of a story that no longer served me. I walked through each room, not as a visitor or a daughter seeking approval, but as an owner, a builder, a woman rewriting the blueprint of her past. In the dining room, the same one where the transfer had taken place, I stood alone and stared out the window at the front lawn. For so many years I had watched from that seat as my father made decisions, told stories, crowned Elliot with responsibilities I was never offered. Now I was the one at the head of the table. Not by inheritance, by intention. The following Monday I had a bronze plaque installed near the front steps. It read, "The Turner House. Reclaimed and Restored 2025. A space built by those once overlooked, now standing in full view." When I stepped back and read those words aloud to myself, I felt something release. Not anger. Not revenge. Closure. This house had once been the center of my silence. Now it would be the heart of my voice. I didn't expect the phone call from my mother. Not the next day. Not in that tone. "He's sitting in the kitchen crying," she whispered. "Your father." I had to sit down. Of all the emotions I imagined seeing from him, rage, denial, even cold silence, I never pictured tears. "He didn't think you'd really do it," she continued, her voice shaking a little. "He thought maybe it was a bluff, or that someone else bought it and you'd back them. But when he drove by and saw the sign being updated, the plaque, he knew." I closed my eyes for a moment. "I never wanted to break him," I said softly. "You didn't," she replied. "He broke himself, Caroline. You just stopped holding the pieces together for him." There was a long pause. "He asked if you'd speak to him." I didn't answer right away, because I didn't know if I wanted to. Not out of spite. Not even pain. I just didn't know what was left to say to a man who'd only seen my worth when it came with a deed and a plaque. Still, later that week I agreed to meet. Not at the house. Not at his request. On neutral ground. We sat on a park bench near Willow Creek's old war memorial. Fitting somehow, given all the battles we never spoke of. He looked older than I remembered. Smaller. Not physically, but in presence. The man who once towered over every room now sat hunched, his hands clasped, his eyes glassy. "Thanks for coming," he said. I nodded. "I've been thinking," he continued, "about a lot of things. About how I raised you. What I said. What I didn't." I waited. "I thought I was doing what was right," he said. "Passing down the family name, the house, the responsibility. That's what my father did. And his before him." He looked at me then, really looked at me. "But you didn't need to be handed anything. You built it yourself. All of it." I nodded slowly. "I did. I was wrong," he said, the words tasting foreign in his mouth. "I see that now. I didn't know how to change what I'd been taught." "That's the thing about old lessons," I said gently. "They stay rooted until you decide to pull them out." He gave a weak laugh. "Your mother says you're turning the house into a school." "Not a school," I corrected. "A mentorship space. For women starting out in real estate. For the ones no one believes in until it's too late." He nodded. "You'll do good things there," he said. "Better than I ever did." I didn't respond right away. I just watched the wind ripple the trees overhead, feeling the weight of decades shift between us. After a moment I said, "I don't hate you, Dad, but I did stop waiting for you to see me." He looked down at his hands. "I deserved that." "No," I said quietly. "You deserved a chance to change. And now you've got one. What you do with it isn't up to me." We sat in silence after that. No grand reconciliation. No tearful embrace. Just an understanding, raw, fragile, but real. As I stood to leave, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out. It was a key. The old brass key to the house. Worn, slightly tarnished. The one I used to ask to borrow just to sit on the porch alone after school. I believe this belongs to you now, he said, holding it out. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I smiled faintly. It always did. And then I walked away. That evening, I returned to the house one last time before the renovations resumed. The workers had cleared out the furniture, leaving echoes where conversations used to live. I walked barefoot across the hardwood floor of the dining room, the same place I once cleared plates in silence while the men discussed the future. I stood where he used to sit, and this time I spoke aloud. My name is Caroline Turner, I said to the empty air, steady and proud. And I belong here. Not because you let me in, but because I walked through the door myself. The words didn't echo. They settled, like they had always been waiting to be spoken. And I knew then truly that the house wasn't just mine in deed. It was mine in story. By summer, the Turner house no longer looked like the one I grew up in. The bones were the same, yes, the brick exterior still framed by those towering oak trees, the front porch still creaking in the same places. But inside the house had transformed. The dusty carpets were gone. The wallpaper, faded and yellowed with time, had been stripped away. In its place, clean white walls, wide plank floors, warm lighting, and large open spaces where conversation could flow and ideas could take root. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a launch pad. Turner House Women's Initiative opened its doors that August. The idea had come to me gradually, over years of remembering what it felt like to be overlooked, unheard, unseen. There were women just like me, ambitious, capable, and ready, but told to stay in their lane. I wanted to create a space where they wouldn't just be welcomed, but celebrated. Where they'd walk into a room and be met with, "What's your vision?" instead of, "Who do you belong to?" The house became a hub. We hosted seminars on real estate investing, business strategy, negotiation skills. We held workshops on confidence, leadership, legacy planning. We created a scholarship for young women graduating from Willow Creek High who wanted to pursue real estate, finance, or urban planning. One of our first applicants said, "I didn't think a place like this would exist for someone like me." I smiled when I read that, because I had once thought the same. I hired staff, mostly women from nearby towns, many of whom had once been passed over for promotions or told they weren't tough enough to handle business. They proved otherwise every single day. I kept my name off the signs, not because I was hiding, but because I wanted the space to speak louder than I ever could. Still, people knew. The town knew. And slowly the narrative changed. I wasn't just the daughter who left. I was the woman who came back. Not for validation but for transformation. Mom visited often. She brought cookies for the interns, hugged every receptionist like they were family, and beamed with pride every time someone said, "You must be Caroline's mother." She never missed a workshop. Dad, on the other hand, stayed away. He never asked to visit. Never pushed. But one day I saw his truck parked across the street, engine off, just sitting there, watching. He didn't approach and I didn't wave. That was enough for me. A quiet acknowledgement. A small unfinished gesture from a man who used to believe legacy had only one shape and one air. One afternoon as I walked the perimeter of the property, clipboard in hand, a young woman named Tasha, one of our new recruits, stopped me near the porch steps. "Miss Turner," she asked, wide-eyed, "was this really your family's house?" I nodded. "And now it's all yours?" I smiled. "Yes. But it's yours too now. This place is for all of us." She looked around, taking in the wraparound porch, the windows glowing with soft afternoon light. My dad always told me women don't need to worry about owning things. Just find someone who does. I felt that familiar heat rise in my chest, the old memory of similar words spoken in a similar voice. "Well," I said gently, "he was wrong." She grinned, and I knew then this was why I came back. Not to confront the past, but to rewrite it. Later that week, I stood at the edge of the property and looked out over the lawn, now freshly trimmed, with benches and garden paths lining the border. The oak trees swayed above me like sentinels. I imagined the version of myself who used to sit under them as a girl, journal in hand, dreaming of being important one day. I wished she could see this. Not the house, the becoming. I thought about the women who would come through these doors long after I was gone. Women who would start businesses, buy buildings, create wealth, teach others. And maybe, just maybe, some of them would return one day just like I did, not out of spite, but because legacy deserves to be reclaimed with dignity. As I turned to go back inside, I noticed something resting at the edge of the porch. A small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. I opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph, faded but familiar. Me, age 9, standing on the front steps, arms crossed, a fierce little frown on my face. Behind me, Dad, looking distracted, not quite aware I was even in the frame. And taped to the back was a note. In my father's handwriting. I missed it then. But I see it now. You were always meant to lead. Dad. My hands trembled. I didn't cry. I just folded the note slowly, held it against my chest and closed my eyes. Because some words, when they finally arrive, even if late, are enough. The funny thing about winning, real quiet internal winning, is that it doesn't feel like fireworks. Feels like breathing. Feels like walking into a room and no longer questioning if you belong there. It feels like walking past the house that once represented everything you were denied, and knowing it now stands because of you. Not for pride, not for payback, but for purpose. That's how I feel now. The Turner house no longer defines me. It reflects me. There are still days I walk the grounds alone. I check the corners, inspect the woodwork, run my hand along the railing of the staircase like I used to as a child. But I don't feel small in those moments anymore. I feel steady. Rooted. The same way I hope every woman who walks through those doors will feel when she starts believing in the weight of her own voice. Sometimes people ask me why I didn't keep the house as a private home. Why not turn it into a legacy estate? A monument to everything I've accomplished? My answer is simple. I didn't come back to sit on a throne. I came back to build bridges. A few months after the mentorship program launched, I received an invitation in the mail. It was handwritten, formal, from the Willow Creek Town Committee. They wanted to honor me at their annual Founders Banquet for transforming a piece of our town's history into a symbol of future opportunity. I stared at the letter for a long time. The same people who once looked the other way when I was dismissed at school meetings, or called just Martin's girl, were now preparing to give me a plaque and a round of applause. I thought about not going. But then I remembered the younger version of me, the one who sat at the kids' table, who brought proposals to family dinners only to be told to let the boys handle it, who walked away from her own home to prove she could build one. She deserved to stand tall in that room. So I went. I wore a simple navy dress. No frills. No labels. Just confidence. When they called my name, I didn't rush up. I walked with measured steps, heart calm. I accepted the plaque, smiled for the photos, and then as I took the microphone, I looked out at a room filled with the very people who had once believed I had no place. And I said this: legacy isn't just something we inherit. It's something we choose to carry or choose to change. I didn't return to reclaim what I was owed. I returned to build what I never had. And now, I open the door for others who've been told it's not their concern. Because it always was. There was silence. Then a long rising round of applause. In the back of the room I saw my mother. Tears in her eyes. Hands clasped. Proud in the way only a mother can be. And next to her my father. He didn't clap. But he didn't look away either. He just nodded once, the smallest gesture in the world. And yet somehow it felt like the final puzzle piece quietly slipping into place. We spoke briefly afterward. No long speeches. No apologies. Just a shared look, a handshake. A passing of something intangible. An unspoken truth. She made it. In the months that followed, the mentorship program expanded. We began working with local banks to help our women secure first-time investment loans. We developed a curriculum that was picked up by 2 regional universities. And most importantly, we kept listening to each other. Creating a space where stories were shared, knowledge passed down, and every woman who walked in knew she was not alone. I still live in the city most of the week. But I come back to Willow Creek every Friday morning. I drive along the same winding road I once fled down in silence, only now it feels like a road home. Not to a family's house, but to a legacy I built myself. Sometimes when the house is quiet and the sun cuts through the windows just right, I think back to that day on the porch, the day I invited my father to sign away the house. He thought it was a loss. But for me it was a beginning. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it's a daughter who was never supposed to return. coming back not with anger in her voice, but with keys in her hand. What would you have done if your family told you that you didn't belong? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next story of quiet strength, unexpected triumph, and the legacies we choose to build for ourselves. Thank you for listening.